The aroma of grilled meats and exotic spices filled the air, mingling with the hum of laughter and conversation.
Los Angeles was alive tonight, buzzing with the energy of the annual street food festival.
As I wandered through the crowded aisles, sipping on a cold craft beer, I felt a rare sense of peace. Work had been relentless lately, and this was a welcome escape, a chance to unwind, to forget about the endless deadlines and client meetings.
But then, amidst the sea of faces, something caught my eye.
Or rather, someone.
At first, I thought I was mistaken. It couldn't be.
My wife, Lily, standing across the way, her hand intertwined with another man's. A man who was all too familiar. Matt, the celebrated chef whose name had become synonymous with culinary genius in this city.
I froze, my heart pounding in my chest.
They were oblivious to the world around them, laughing and leaning into each other as if they were the only two people in existence.
I wanted to look away, to dismiss it as some horrible misunderstanding. But my feet wouldn't move. The truth was undeniable, glaring at me under the garish neon lights of the festival. Lily's face was lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years. She was captivated, completely absorbed by Matt.
The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't a one-time fling.
It was something more.
Something that had been brewing in the shadows while I was too caught up in my work to notice. I felt a surge of anger, but also a cold, calculating clarity.
I knew, in that moment,
that confronting them now would be pointless. It would only lead to denials, tears, and the same old excuses. No, if I was going to do this, I needed to be smart.
I needed to be patient. And most of all, I needed to make sure they both paid for what they'd done.
As I stood there, frozen in the crowd, my mind raced back to the little things, those subtle shifts in Lily's behavior that I had dismissed as unimportant.
The late nights at work, the sudden interest in gourmet cooking, the new recipes she would rave about. Always mentioning how Matt had inspired her. It all seemed so innocent at the time, but now, it was like seeing pieces of a puzzle fall into place, revealing a picture I didn't want to see. I watched them for a few minutes longer, my grip tightening around the bottle in my hand.
Every laugh, every touch between them, was like a needle in my skin. But the anger I felt wasn't just directed at Lily, it was also at myself.
How could I have been so blind?
How could I have let things get this far without realizing what was happening right under my nose? The answer was painfully simple. I had been too consumed with my own life, too wrapped up in my career to notice the distance that had grown between us.
My projects, my clients, my reputation, they had all come first. And in that vacuum, someone else had stepped in.
Matt had stepped in. But standing there, in that moment, I knew that beating myself up over the past wouldn't change anything.
What mattered now was what I did next.
I couldn't just let this slide.
I wasn't going to let them get away with it.
No. If they thought they could play me for a fool, they were about to learn just how wrong they were.
I would bide my time, make my plans.
And when the moment was right, I would strike back in a way they'd never forget.
For now, I forced myself to turn away, blending back into the crowd. There would be no confrontation tonight.
But as I walked away from the festival, my mind was already working, calculating the next steps.
Lily and Matt had no idea what was coming for them. In the days that followed, the image of Lily and Matt together haunted me like a ghost.
Every smile she gave me, every kiss goodnight, felt like a lie.
But instead of confronting her, I kept my suspicions locked inside, biding my time.
The truth was, I needed to know just how deep this betrayal ran before I could decide on my next move.
I began to pay closer attention to the details I had previously ignored. Lily's sudden changes in schedule, her frequent texts that she would quickly swipe away whenever I entered the room.
It was as if she was living a double life, slipping away from me in ways I hadn't even noticed until now. One evening, she mentioned that she'd be working late again, something that had become all too common. I nodded, pretending to believe her, and watched as she grabbed her purse and left the house. But this time, I didn't just sit back and wait. Instead, I followed her. She drove across town, her route almost too predictable now that I knew what to look for.
She wasn't heading to her office, she was heading straight to Matt's restaurant. The place was closed to the public, but through the glass windows, I could see the faint glow of the kitchen lights. I parked my car at a distance, the knot in my stomach tightening as I watched her disappear inside. For the next hour, I sat there, the tension growing with every passing minute. Finally, the door opened, and there she was, laughing as she stepped out with Matt by her side. He placed a hand on the small of her back, guiding her to his car. It was like watching a nightmare unfold in slow motion. But I kept my distance, forcing myself to stay calm. This was what I needed, proof. Proof that this wasn't just a harmless flirtation but something much more serious. I snapped a few pictures on my phone, my hands shaking with a mix of rage and sorrow. As they drove off, I started the car and headed home. My mind was already working on the next steps. I had the proof I needed, but I wasn't going to confront Lily yet. Not until I had everything in place. I was going to make sure that when the time came, there would be no escape for either of them. Returning home that night, I felt a strange sense of calm settle over me. The pain of betrayal had dulled into something more manageable, something that fueled my resolve rather than breaking it. I had seen enough. I knew what I had to do. Over the next few days, I threw myself into planning. Every spare moment I had was spent strategizing, ensuring that when the time came, my revenge would be as precise and devastating as possible. The first step was to exploit Matt's greatest strength, his reputation as a top chef. If I could dismantle that, it would destroy the foundation of his life, the thing that had brought him and Lily together in the first place. Through my network of contacts in the city, I arranged for a high-profile culinary event, an exclusive competition that would draw the city's elite and be covered by the local press. It wasn't hard to get Matt invited. His name alone was enough to attract attention, and with the promise of publicity, he eagerly accepted the invitation. But what Matt didn't know was that I had a few tricks up my sleeve. I started by reaching out to people who had worked with him in the past, former colleagues, sous chefs, anyone who might have a grudge or a secret to share. It took some digging, but I eventually found what I was looking for. It turned out that Matt had cut corners more than once, relying on a few borrowed recipes that weren't entirely his own. These were small indiscretions, the kind of things that could easily be overlooked in the fast-paced world of high-end dining. But in the right context, they could be devastating. I made sure to get my hands on those recipes, along with some damning evidence of how Matt had acquired them. Then, with a little persuasion, I convinced a few key figures in the culinary world to help me expose the truth at the event. The plan was simple. During the competition, I would orchestrate a situation where Matt's signature dish would be compared side by side with the original version from another chef, a chef who was more than willing to set the record straight. Meanwhile, I kept up the charade at home. I smiled at Lily, pretended nothing was wrong, and even encouraged her to attend the event with me, playing the part of the supportive husband. She had no idea that the walls were closing in around her and her lover. As the date of the competition approached, I felt a growing sense of anticipation. Every detail was falling into place, and the thought of watching Matt's downfall unfold in front of an audience filled me with a dark satisfaction. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my pride, my dignity. It was about showing them both that I wasn't someone to be underestimated. Lily and Matt had made their choices, and soon enough, they would have to face the consequences. The stage was set, and I was ready to pull the curtain on their little act. The day of the culinary battle arrived with the kind of electric energy that only a high-stakes event could bring. The venue was one of the city's most prestigious hotels. Its grand ballroom transformed into a culinary arena. The air buzzed with excitement, as well-dressed guests mingled, sipping on champagne and discussing which chef might come out on top. I stood near the entrance, scanning the room as people arrived. Matt was one of the last to show up, making his entrance with the kind of swagger that only someone confident in their craft could manage. He was all smiles, greeting fellow chefs, shaking hands with organizers, completely unaware that today would mark the beginning of his downfall. Lily walked in a few minutes later, stunning as always in a sleek black dress, her arm casually linked with mine. She seemed genuinely excited to be here, whispering in my ear about how thrilling it was to see Matt in his element.
I forced a smile, nodding along, my mind elsewhere. As the event got underway, the atmosphere shifted. The lights dimmed, and the audience took their seats, eager to see culinary mastery on display.
The competition was structured as a series of challenges, each chef tasked with creating a dish under tight time constraints.
The final challenge would be a signature dish round, where the chefs would showcase the creation that defined their career.
This was the moment I had been waiting for.
Matt was up against two other top chefs, both formidable in their own right, but it was clear that all eyes were on him. The MC built up the tension, introducing the judges and explaining the rules, while Matt took his place at the front, exuding confidence.
As the challenge began, I watched every move Matt made, knowing exactly what was coming. He worked swiftly, assembling ingredients with practiced ease, the aroma of his cooking filling the room.
But I wasn't just watching him, I was also watching the judges, who were in on the plan, and the chef I had enlisted to expose him. When the time came for the chefs to present their dishes, Matt was the last to step forward. He unveiled his signature dish with a flourish, explaining its origins and the inspiration behind it, a story I knew was as fabricated as his integrity.
The audience applauded,
impressed by the presentation alone. But then, the twist I had orchestrated came into play. One of the judges, a respected chef from out of town, requested that another dish be brought out, a dish remarkably similar to Matt's.
The room grew quiet as the second dish was placed beside Matt's on the table.
The judge then asked Matt a simple question: "Could you explain how this dish differs from the one you've just presented?" Matt's face paled as he stared at the two plates.
The resemblance was undeniable. And so was the tension in the room. He stammered, trying to come up with an explanation, but the judge wasn't finished.
With a calm, authoritative tone, the judge proceeded to reveal the true origins of the recipe, detailing how it had been conceived years ago by another chef, one who had been all too willing to share their story with me. Gasps filled the room, followed by whispers and murmurs. The realization hit the audience like a shockwave. Matt had been exposed as a fraud in front of the very people who had celebrated him.
I could see the panic in Lily's eyes as she turned to look at me, searching for some kind of explanation. But I simply kept my gaze on Matt, watching as his world crumbled around him.
The crowd's admiration turned to suspicion, then to scorn, and in that moment, I knew that the seeds of my revenge had taken root. The rest of the competition was a blur, with Matt barely managing to keep his composure.
When it was over, he slinked off the stage, his reputation in tatters, while the audience buzzed with the scandal that had just unfolded. Lily was silent during the ride home, her excitement from earlier completely drained. She had no idea how deeply involved I was in what had happened, and I wasn't about to tell her, yet. There would be time for that. For now, I let her sit in the confusion, knowing that this was only the beginning. The stage had been set, the first act completed.
Now, it was time to prepare for the final blow.
The next morning, the fallout from the event was already spreading through the city like wildfire. News outlets and social media were abuzz with talk of the scandal.
Matt's name was everywhere, but not in the way he had grown accustomed to. Instead of praise for his culinary genius, there were accusations of plagiarism and fraud. His carefully crafted image was unraveling, and the culinary community was turning on him. Lily, still in shock from the night before, paced around the kitchen, her phone clutched tightly in her hand.
Every few minutes, she would glance at the screen, reading some new headline or message. Her face growing paler with each one. She hadn't said much to me since the event, and the silence between us was thick with unspoken words. I pretended to be as surprised as she was, asking her questions about what had happened, playing the role of the concerned husband.
"Can you believe it?"
I said, sipping my coffee. I had no idea Matt was capable of something like this. She shook her head, still too stunned to form a coherent response. I don't understand. How could this happen? She muttered. More to herself than to me. It was as if she was trying to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the one now being dragged through the mud. I watched her carefully, noting every flicker of confusion and worry that crossed her face.
This was exactly what I had planned for, to see the cracks start to form, to make her question everything about her relationship with Matt.
She had put him on a pedestal, but now that pedestal was crumbling beneath his feet. As the day wore on, the calls and messages continued to pour in.
Matt was scrambling to do damage control, but every attempt he made only seemed to dig him deeper into the hole. Apologies, explanations, even threats of legal action, they all rang hollow in the face of the evidence that had been presented at the event.
Lily stayed glued to her phone, her anxiety palpable.
Finally, she looked up at me, her voice tinged with desperation.
I need to talk to him, Jason. I need to know what's really going on. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. You do.
Maybe he can explain himself.
She didn't notice the edge in my voice, too focused on her own turmoil.
Grabbing her keys, she hurried out the door, leaving me alone in the house.
I watched her go, feeling a grim satisfaction settle in my chest. She was running to him, but what she didn't realize was that this was exactly what I wanted. While she was gone, I took the time to make a few more calls, solidifying the next phase of my plan. This was just the beginning of the unraveling. I wasn't done with Matt or Lily yet. When Lily returned, hours later, she looked even more distraught. Whatever conversation she had with Matt hadn't gone well.
She tried to put on a brave face, but the tension between us was growing impossible to ignore.
Jason, she began hesitantly, there's something I need to tell you. I raised an eyebrow, pretending to be concerned but already knowing where this was heading. What is it, Lily? She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for the confession. I've been spending time with Matt outside of work. It wasn't supposed to be anything serious, just fun. But now, with everything that's happened, I don't know what to think. Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the guilt that had been eating away at her. But I didn't feel pity, not anymore. This was exactly what she deserved. She had chosen to betray me, to lie and deceive, and now she was facing the consequences. I sighed, keeping my voice calm. Lily, I appreciate you telling me. But this is serious. You need to think about what you really want and what this means for us. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I know. I'm so sorry, Jason. I never wanted to hurt you. I didn't respond right away, letting the silence stretch out between us. When I finally spoke, my tone was measured, but firm. We'll figure this out, Lily. But right now, I need some time to think. With that, I left the room, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She had no idea that I had orchestrated everything, that the events of the past 24 hours were just the beginning of the reckoning I had planned. The stage was set for the final act, and when it came, there would be no turning back. The following days were a whirlwind of tension and unease. Lily walked on eggshells around me, her guilt weighing on her like a shroud. I could see it in every hesitant glance, every awkward silence between us. The once comfortable rhythm of our life together had been shattered. And now we were both navigating the wreckage. I continued to play my part, acting distant but not entirely unforgiving. I wanted her to stew in her guilt, to feel the full weight of what she had done. The more she wrestled with her conscience, the more vulnerable she became. And vulnerability was exactly what I needed for the next step in my plan. One evening, after dinner, Lily finally broke. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on but ignored, as she fidgeted with her hands, unable to look at me. The tension in the room was suffocating, and I knew it was only a matter of time before she cracked. Jason, she said softly, her voice trembling. We need to talk. I muted the TV and turned to face her, keeping my expression neutral. What is it? She took a deep breath, tears already welling up in her eyes.
I've been unfaithful to you.
I let her words hang in the air for a moment, as if they had taken me by surprise, even though I had been anticipating this confession for days. I didn't say anything, just stared at her, waiting for her to continue.
It started a few months ago, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Matt and we got close, and one thing led to another.
I never meant for it to happen, Jason.
I never wanted to hurt you. Her tears were flowing freely now, and she looked at me with a mixture of shame and desperation.
I'm so sorry.
I know I've betrayed your trust, and I don't expect you to forgive me.
But I couldn't keep lying to you. You deserve to know the truth. I remained silent, letting her words sink in. Inside, I felt a dark satisfaction. This was the moment I had been waiting for. She was finally admitting her betrayal, laying it all out in front of me.
But instead of reacting with anger or despair, I kept my emotions in check, focusing on the bigger picture. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke, my voice calm and controlled.
Lily, I appreciate your honesty. But this is a lot to process. She nodded,
wiping her tears with the back of her hand.
I understand.
I'll give you space if that's what you need.
I hope that maybe, in time, we can find a way to move past this. I looked at her, weighing my next words carefully. I don't know if we can, Lily. This isn't something that can be easily forgiven or forgotten.
But right now, I need time to think about what comes next.
Her face crumpled at my response, but she didn't argue. She simply nodded, accepting the uncertainty of our future. Okay, she whispered. I'll give you all the time you need. With that, she left the room, retreating to the bedroom, leaving me alone in the living room. I watched her go, my mind already working on the final phase of my plan.
The confession was a critical step, but it wasn't the end. There was still one more piece to put into place before I could close the chapter on this part of my life. As I sat there, the weight of her words settling in, I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief,
anger, satisfaction, and a tinge of sadness.
But the sadness was fleeting, quickly replaced by a renewed sense of purpose.
This wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. Lily had confessed, but that was only the beginning.
Now, it was time for me to make my final move, to ensure that neither she nor Matt would ever forget the consequences of their betrayal.
The stage was set, and the final act was about to begin. The days following Lily's confession were a blur of silent contemplation and careful planning.
The satisfaction of hearing her admit her betrayal was gratifying, but it wasn't enough.
I needed to close this chapter of my life in a way that left no room for doubt or regret. I wanted both Lily and Matt to understand that their actions had consequences, ones they would never escape from. With Lily tiptoeing around me, consumed by guilt, it was the perfect time to execute the final phase of my plan. I'd already dismantled Matt's career, but that was only half of what I intended to do. Now, it was time to dismantle his personal life, and, by extension, Lily's. One afternoon, while Lily was out, I went to my office and pulled out the folder I had been compiling for weeks. Inside were all the pieces of evidence I had gathered, photos, messages, emails, everything that showed just how deep Lily and Matt's affair had gone. But this wasn't just about humiliating them, it was about making sure they felt the full weight of their actions in every aspect of their lives. I started by contacting a few key people, Matt's business partners, influential figures in the culinary world, and, most importantly, his wife, Nicole. Nicole and Matt had always presented themselves as the perfect couple, and I knew she had no idea what had been going on behind her back. It was time she found out. I sent her a carefully worded email, attaching the most damning pieces of evidence. I didn't need to write much, just enough to ensure she knew that Matt's betrayal wasn't just a fleeting mistake but a calculated deception. I knew that Nicole was a strong, proud woman, and the humiliation of discovering her husband's infidelity in such a public way would be devastating. But that was the point. Once the email was sent, I moved on to the next part of my plan, I reached out to a well-known gossip columnist in Los Angeles, someone who thrived on scandal and had a large following. I provided them with an anonymous tip, complete with enough evidence to make the story irresistible. Within hours, the news was spreading like wildfire.
Matt, the once celebrated chef, was not only a fraud in the kitchen but also a cheater at home.
The fallout was swift and brutal. Meanwhile, at home, Lily was growing more anxious by the day. She could sense that something was coming, but she had no idea what it was. I kept my distance, giving her the cold shoulder, making her feel the isolation of her choices. She would soon realize that this wasn't just about us, it was about the life she had destroyed with her selfishness. Then, one evening,
the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. Nicole, furious and heartbroken, confronted Matt in public, her voice shaking as she demanded answers in front of their friends and colleagues. The scene was chaotic, shouting, accusations, and finally, the moment when Nicole threw her wedding ring at Matt's feet, declaring their marriage over. The news spread quickly, and soon everyone in their social circle knew the truth.
Lily found out the next morning. She was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her phone when I walked in. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes, her face a mask of despair. "It's over," she whispered, her voice broken.
"Matt, he's lost everything.
His career, his marriage, everything." I nodded, showing no emotion.
"What did you expect, Lily?
Actions have consequences." She didn't respond, just sat there, overwhelmed by the reality of what had happened. For the first time, she truly understood the gravity of her choices. She wasn't just losing Matt. She was losing everything we had built together. But I wasn't finished yet. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a set of divorce papers. I placed them on the table in front of her, watching as her eyes widened in shock.
"Sign them," I said, my voice cold and final.
She looked up at me, trembling. "Jason, please. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work through this. We can try to fix what's broken." I shook my head. "No, Lily. There's nothing left to fix. You made your choice.
And now it's time for me to make mine."
She hesitated, her hands shaking as she picked up the pen. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, might try to argue her way out of it.
But then, with a resigned sigh, she signed her name, the ink bleeding into the paper like the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. When it was done, I took the papers and left the room, feeling a sense of closure wash over me.
The chapter was finally over. I had taken back control, reclaimed my pride, and ensured that both Lily and Matt would live with the consequences of their betrayal for the rest of their lives.
As I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The future was uncertain, but it was mine to shape. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move on, leaving the wreckage of the past behind me. The house felt different after that night, quieter, emptier.
Lily had left, taking only a few belongings with her. The divorce papers were filed, and the process was already in motion. There was no going back now. The life we had shared was over. And the echoes of her betrayal seemed to fade with each passing day.
At first, I wasn't sure how I would feel after everything was said and done. There was a part of me that expected to feel hollow, as if the victory I had fought so hard for would leave me with nothing but emptiness. But instead, I felt a strange sense of peace.
The storm had passed, and now there was nothing but calm in its wake. I threw myself into my work, focusing on the projects that had been neglected during the turmoil of the past few months. Architecture had always been my passion, a way to create order and beauty out of chaos. Now, it was also my escape, a way to rebuild not just structures, but myself.
Every morning, I woke up early, heading into the office before the city had fully come to life. I buried myself in blueprints and designs, finding solace in the precision and creativity that my work required.
The noise of the world outside faded as I lost myself in the details, crafting buildings that would stand the test of time. Long after the mess of my personal life was forgotten,
My colleagues noticed the change in me, but they didn't ask questions.
They knew enough to understand that something significant had happened, but they respected my privacy. I was grateful for that, grateful for the distraction that work provided, and for the sense of normalcy it brought back into my life. In the evenings, I took up new hobbies, filling the void that Lily's absence had left. I started running, pushing my body to its limits as I pounded the pavement.
Mile after mile. The physical exertion was a release, a way to burn off the residual anger and frustration that still lingered beneath the surface.
With each run, I felt a little lighter, a little more in control of my emotions. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with during the years of my marriage. We went out for drinks, caught up on each other's lives, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to enjoy the company of others without the weight of betrayal hanging over me. Slowly, the pieces of my life started to come together, like a puzzle being carefully reconstructed. But despite the progress I was making, there were still moments when the past crept back in. I would find myself thinking about Lily, wondering where she was, what she was doing, if she regretted the choices she had made. But those thoughts no longer consumed me. They were just fleeting echoes, reminders of a life that was no longer mine. One evening, as I was sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun set over the city, I received a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was short and to the point. "Jason, it's Nicole. I wanted to thank you." I stared at the message, surprised by the sudden contact. Nicole had every reason to hate me, or at the very least, want nothing to do with me. I had been the one to expose Matt's affair, the one who had sent her life into a tailspin. But here she was, reaching out. Curious, I replied, "Why are you thanking me?" A few minutes later, her response came through, "Because you showed me the truth. I deserved to know, and you gave me that. It hurt, but now I can move on. We both can." I didn't know what to say to that. I had been so focused on my own revenge, on making Matt and Lily pay, that I hadn't really considered what it would mean for Nicole. In my mind, she had been collateral damage, another casualty of their betrayal. But now, reading her message, I realized that she had found her own closure in all of this. I typed out a response, unsure of what to say. "I'm glad you found peace. I hope you can move on from this." Her reply was almost immediate, "You too, Jason. We both deserve better." As I set my phone down, I felt a strange sense of relief. Nicole was right. We did deserve better. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new, something free from the pain and deceit that had defined the last few months of our lives. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in shades of orange and purple. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill my lungs. The past was behind me now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to embrace whatever the future had in store. Moving forward wouldn't be easy, but I had taken the first steps. And that, I realized, was enough. A few months had passed since the whirlwind of events that had unraveled my life. The divorce was finalized, and Lily was nothing more than a distant memory, a chapter of my life that I had finally closed. I had found solace in my work and rediscovered passions that had lain dormant for years. But as much as I had healed, there was still a lingering sense of emptiness, a void that my newfound routines and distractions couldn't entirely fill. That's when I decided it was time to do something different, something I'd always wanted to do but had never allowed myself to pursue. I needed a change, a fresh start, and the opportunity to reinvent myself in a place where the past couldn't follow me. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, I found myself browsing through travel websites, scrolling through destinations that promised escape and adventure. I wasn't sure where I wanted to go, but I knew it had to be somewhere far away, somewhere new. That's when I stumbled upon a listing for a small, secluded cabin in the mountains of Colorado. The photos showed a rustic, yet modern retreat, surrounded by towering pine trees and snow-capped peaks. It was exactly what I needed, a place to disconnect, to find peace, and to start anew. Within a week, I had booked the cabin and arranged for a leave of absence from work. My colleagues were surprised by my sudden decision, but they didn't question it.
They knew I had been through a lot, and I think they sensed that this was something I needed to do for myself. As I packed my bags, I felt a mix of excitement and apprehension.
I had never taken such a bold step before, never uprooted my life on a whim. But there was something liberating about the idea of leaving everything behind. Even if only for a short while. It was a chance to reset, to find out who I was without the weight of my past dragging me down.
The drive to Colorado was long, but it gave me time to reflect on everything that had happened. The winding roads and breathtaking scenery offered a sense of clarity that I hadn't felt in months. With every mile, I felt the tension in my body easing, the worries of the city life melting away as I approached my destination.
When I finally arrived at the cabin, I was greeted by a serene silence, broken only by the gentle rustling of the trees and the distant call of a bird. The air was crisp and clean, a stark contrast to the smog and noise of Los Angeles. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, and smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. The cabin itself was perfect, cozy and inviting, with large windows that offered stunning views of the surrounding landscape. There was a fireplace in the living room, a small kitchen stocked with the essentials, and a comfortable bed that promised restful nights. It was simple, but that's exactly what I wanted. Simplicity, after all the complications of the past. The first few days were spent exploring the area, hiking through the woods, and letting myself get lost in nature. There was something therapeutic about the solitude, the quiet moments where it was just me and the mountains. I had no schedule, no obligations, just the freedom to be, to exist without the pressures that had once consumed me. As I settled into the rhythm of life in the cabin, I found myself thinking less and less about Lily and the events that had led me here. The pain that had once felt so raw and overwhelming was now a distant ache, something I could acknowledge without letting it control me. I was healing, in ways I hadn't thought possible. One evening, as I sat by the fireplace with a book in hand, I realized that this was the fresh start I had been searching for. It wasn't just about escaping the past, it was about rediscovering who I was. Who I wanted to be. The cabin, the mountains, the solitude, they had given me the space to do that, to rebuild my life on my own terms. But as much as I enjoyed the solitude, I knew it wasn't sustainable forever. This retreat was a beginning, not an end. Eventually, I would return to the world, to my career, to the life I had left behind. But when I did, I would return as a different person, stronger, more resilient, and ready to face whatever came next. For now, though, I was content to stay here, in this peaceful sanctuary, and let the healing continue. There was no rush, no pressure. Just the promise of a new beginning, one that I would create with the lessons of the past and the hope for the future. As I looked out the window at the stars twinkling above the mountains, I felt a sense of contentment that I hadn't known in a long time. The journey wasn't over, but I was on the right path. And for the first time, I felt truly free. Free to be myself, free to embrace the unknown. And free to move forward into whatever the future held. The days in the mountains stretched into weeks, each one blending into the next with a comforting regularity. I fell into a routine that was both peaceful and restorative. Long hikes through the wilderness, quiet evenings by the fire, and plenty of time to think without the distractions of my former life. The solitude was exactly what I needed to find my footing again. But as much as I cherished the quiet, there were moments when I found myself craving human connection. It wasn't loneliness, exactly, but rather a recognition that my healing journey couldn't be completed in isolation. I needed to rejoin the world at some point, to reconnect with people in a meaningful way. What I didn't expect was how that connection would come about. One crisp afternoon, as I was making my way back to the cabin after a hike, I noticed a car parked near the entrance to the trail. It was unusual to see anyone this far out. Most of the cabins in the area were empty, used only as summer retreats. My curiosity piqued. I approached the car and saw a woman standing by the trunk,
struggling to lift a heavy box.
She looked up as I approached, and for a moment, we both just stared at each other. She was striking, dark hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a mix of exhaustion and determination in her eyes. She seemed out of place here, yet somehow perfectly at home. "Need a hand?" I offered, stepping closer. She hesitated, then nodded, stepping aside to let me take the box. "Thanks. I wasn't expecting this thing to be so heavy." I lifted the box easily and placed it on the ground beside her car. "No problem."
"What brings you out here?"
"Not many people venture this far into the mountains." She smiled, a little sheepishly. "I could ask you the same thing."
"But I guess we're both looking for the same thing, a bit of peace and quiet."
I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant.
"Yeah, that's why I'm here too. Needed a break from the city, from everything, really."
She looked at me more closely, as if assessing whether to say more.
Finally, she extended her hand. "I'm Grace, by the way."
"I'm renting a cabin nearby for a few weeks. Thought I'd get away from the chaos of life for a bit."
"Jason," I replied, shaking her hand. "I've been here for a while myself."
"It's a good place to clear your head." We chatted for a few more minutes, talking about the area, the trails, and the appeal of solitude. There was an easy rapport between us, something that felt natural and unforced. It had been a long time since I'd had a conversation like this, simple, genuine, and without any hidden agendas.
Before long, Grace had to leave, but we exchanged numbers with the idea of meeting up again, maybe for a hike or a cup of coffee.
I didn't think much of it at the time, just two people who had crossed paths in a remote part of the world, finding some common ground. But as I watched her drive away, I realized that our meeting had stirred something in me, a faint spark of interest that I hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, Grace and I did meet up a few more times.
We explored different trails together, shared stories about our lives, and gradually, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't expected. There was something about Grace that made it easy to talk, to share the parts of my life that I had kept locked away for so long.
She told me about her own struggles, about a messy breakup that had driven her to seek refuge in the mountains. We both laughed at the irony of finding solace in the same place. Both of us running from the chaos of failed relationships.
But there was no bitterness in her voice, no lingering anger. Just a quiet acceptance that life didn't always go as planned. As the days turned into weeks, our connection deepened. We spent more time together, not just hiking but cooking meals in our respective cabins, talking late into the night by the fire.
There was no rush, no pressure to define what was happening between us. It was simply two people finding comfort and companionship in each other's company.
One evening, after a long day of exploring, we found ourselves sitting on the porch of my cabin, wrapped in blankets as the sun dipped below the horizon. The silence between us was comfortable, the kind that didn't need to be filled with words. But as the stars began to appear in the sky, I felt the need to say something, to acknowledge the shift that had taken place. "Grace," I began, my voice soft, "I didn't come out here expecting to meet anyone.
I thought I needed to be alone to figure things out.
But I'm glad we met. You've made this time here better."
She turned to look at me, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "I feel the same way, Jason. I wasn't looking for anything either, but sometimes life surprises you. And I think we both needed this, whatever this is." I nodded, feeling a sense of contentment settle over me.
"Yeah, we did." We sat in silence for a while longer, the connection between us unspoken but understood.
There were no expectations, no promises of what might come next.
Just the comfort of knowing that, in this quiet corner of the world, we had found something meaningful, a new beginning, perhaps, or simply the start of a new chapter in both our lives. As the night grew darker, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The past was still there, but it no longer had a hold on me. And with Grace by my side, I felt ready to embrace whatever the future might bring. The winter months in Colorado were nothing short of magical.
The mountains.
draped in snow, looked like a scene from a postcard, and the crisp air invigorated me in ways I hadn't expected. My time with Grace had brought a warmth to the cold that I hadn't felt in years, a rekindling of something inside me that I thought had been lost forever. As we spent more time together, Grace and I began to talk about what would come next, beyond the mountains and the temporary escape we had both found.
We had always been honest with each other. Our time in the cabin was never meant to be permanent.
Just a pause, a retreat from the world. But as the days grew shorter and the idea of returning to Los Angeles loomed closer, I found myself dreading the thought of going back to my old life without her.
It was during one of our evening walks that Grace broached the topic that had been on both our minds.
We were walking along a snow-covered trail, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick blanket of snow, when she turned to me, her breath visible in the cold air.
"Jason, what do you think about staying out here a bit longer?" she asked,
her voice hesitant, as if unsure of how I would react.
I stopped walking and looked at her, considering her words.
I had grown to love this place, the simplicity, the peace it offered, and of course, the time I had spent with Grace.
But I had responsibilities back in Los Angeles, a career, a life I had built over many years.
Could I really just leave it all behind?
I've been thinking about that too, I admitted, my breath forming clouds as I spoke.
But what would that look like?
Are we talking about staying here indefinitely? Grace smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners.
Maybe not indefinitely, but why rush back?
We both came here to heal, to find something new.
What if this is it?
What if this is our chance to start fresh, without the baggage of our past lives? Her words resonated with me.
The idea of starting over, of building something new with Grace, was tempting.
I had already seen what life could be like without the constant pressure and demands of my career, and for the first time, the thought of walking away from it all didn't fill me with fear.
What about work?
I asked, though the question felt less important than it might have once. You have a life back in the city too. Grace shrugged, a playful smile on her lips. I'm a freelance writer, Jason. I can work from anywhere. And you've already proven you can thrive without the hustle and bustle. Maybe it's time to think about what really matters. Her words struck a chord. I had spent so much of my life chasing success, climbing the ladder, that I had forgotten what it was like to simply live.
The time I had spent in the mountains, away from the noise and stress, had shown me a different way of being, one that was more fulfilling, more authentic.
I don't want to go back to the way things were, I confessed, more to myself than to her. But staying here, it feels like running away. Or maybe it's running toward something better, she said softly, reaching out to take my hand.
We don't have to decide everything right now.
But we can start by staying here a little longer.
Seeing where this takes us. I looked at her, at the warmth and sincerity in her eyes, and felt a wave of certainty wash over me.
This was what I had been searching for,
not just an escape, but a new direction, a new purpose.
And with Grace by my side, it didn't feel like I was running away.
It felt like I was finally running toward something worth having.
We continued our walk in silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. But as we neared the cabin, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It excited me.
That night, as we sat by the fire, I made a decision.
Let's stay, I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. At least for a while. We can figure the rest out as we go.
Grace smiled, her eyes shining in the firelight.
I'd like that, Jason. I'd like that a lot. And so, we decided to extend our stay in the mountains, to give ourselves more time to explore this new life we had stumbled upon.
There were still questions to be answered, challenges to face, but for now, we were content to live in the moment, to embrace the new horizons that lay ahead.
In the weeks that followed, we fell into a rhythm that felt natural and right.
We spent our days exploring the wilderness, our evenings cooking meals together, and our nights talking about everything and nothing.
It was simple, but it was enough. Eventually, we knew we would have to return to the world, to face the realities of our lives.
But when we did, we would do so with a new perspective, a new understanding of what really mattered.
And we would face it together, ready to take on whatever came next.
For now, though, the mountains were our home, and the future, whatever it held, was something to look forward to, not fear. We had found our new horizon, and we were ready to embrace it, hand in hand.
As the winter months began to give way to the first signs of spring, Grace and I knew that our time in the mountains was coming to an end.
The snow was melting, revealing patches of green beneath, and the air was growing warmer with each passing day. The change in the seasons felt like a signal, a reminder that we couldn't stay hidden away forever.
The world outside was calling us back, and it was time to answer. Our decision to return to Los Angeles was not made lightly.
We had found something special in our mountain retreat, a connection that had grown stronger with each day.
But we also knew that we couldn't build a life on isolation alone. We had responsibilities, careers, and unfinished business that needed to be addressed.
The time had come to face the world again, to take what we had learned in the mountains and apply it to our lives back home.
The drive back to Los Angeles was long and contemplative.
We took our time, stopping along the way to take in the changing landscape, the transition from the quiet solitude of the mountains to the bustling energy of the city.
It was a journey not just of distance, but of mindset, a shift from the peaceful retreat we had created to the reality of the lives we had left behind. As we neared the city, I felt a mix of emotions, anxiety about what awaited us, but also a sense of readiness. I was no longer the man who had fled to the mountains in search of solace. I had found a new sense of purpose, a new direction, and I was eager to see how it would manifest in the place I once called home. When we finally arrived in Los Angeles, the city greeted us with its usual vibrancy, the traffic, the noise, the constant hum of life that never seemed to stop. It was a stark contrast to the silence of the mountains.
But it didn't feel as overwhelming as it once had. Instead, there was a sense of familiarity, of returning to something known, but with fresh eyes. Grace and I settled into our respective homes, but we didn't fall back into old patterns. We were determined to maintain the balance we had found in the mountains, to keep the simplicity and mindfulness that had brought us so much peace. Our relationship was stronger than ever, and we knew that we could face whatever challenges came our way, as long as we faced them together. One of the first things I did upon returning was to reach out to my firm. I had been on a leave of absence for months, and while I knew that there would be questions and concerns, I felt ready to address them. I didn't want to return to the same hectic pace that had consumed me before. Instead, I was determined to redefine my role, to prioritize the work that truly mattered to me and to let go of the rest. To my surprise, my colleagues were supportive. They understood the need for balance, for finding meaning in the work we did, and they were willing to accommodate my new approach. It was a relief to know that I didn't have to sacrifice my career to maintain the life I wanted. I could have both, a successful career and a fulfilling personal life, if I was willing to be intentional about it. Grace, too, found a way to integrate the lessons of the mountains into her life. She continued to write, but with a renewed focus on topics that truly inspired her. She no longer felt the need to chase every opportunity, to constantly be on the move. Instead, she chose projects that resonated with her, that allowed her to express the authenticity she had found in our time together. As the weeks went by, we began to build a new life in the city, one that was different from the one we had left behind, but no less meaningful. We made time for each other, for the things that brought us joy, and for the quiet moments that reminded us of the mountains. We explored new parts of the city, found new places to eat, new trails to hike, and new ways to connect with the world around us. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of Grace's apartment, overlooking the city lights, I realized how much had changed. The mountains were far behind us now, but the peace they had given us remained. We had brought a piece of that tranquility back with us, and it had become the foundation of our new life. We've come a long way, haven't we? Grace said, her voice soft as she leaned into me. Yeah, we have, I replied, wrapping my arm around her. I never thought we'd end up here, but I'm glad we did. This feels right.
It does,
She agreed, a contented smile on her face.
and whatever comes next, we'll face it together.
As I looked out at the city, I felt a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't known in a long time. The journey had been difficult, full of unexpected twists and turns, but it had led me to a place of contentment, of clarity.
I was no longer running from the past. I was embracing the present, with all its challenges and opportunities. And as for the future, I knew it would bring its own set of surprises.
But with Grace by my side, I was ready for whatever lay ahead. We had returned to the city, but we had done so on our own terms, with a new perspective and a new understanding of what truly mattered. The mountains had given us a gift, a new beginning.
And now, it was up to us to build on that foundation, to create a life that was true to who we were and what we wanted.
The return to Los Angeles was not the end of our journey, but the start of a new chapter, one filled with possibilities and the promise of a future we were ready to embrace.
The first few months back in Los Angeles were a whirlwind of readjustment.
The city's pulse was relentless, but with Grace and I working together to find balance, we managed to navigate its demands with a newfound ease.
We had learned that a life of true contentment wasn't about escaping the chaos but integrating the calm we had found into our daily routines.
One afternoon, as I was finishing up some work in my office, I received an unexpected phone call.
It was a former colleague, Linda, who had been a close friend before the upheaval of the past year. She wanted to catch up, to hear how I had been and what I was doing now. Her call was a reminder of the life I had left behind, and it gave me a chance to reflect on how far I had come. We agreed to meet for coffee at a cafe near my office, a place that had been one of my old haunts. As I walked there, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. It was strange to be reconnecting with someone from that period of my life, a time that felt both distant and immediate. When Linda and I met, it was like no time had passed at all. We shared a warm hug and settled into a corner table.
She looked the same, bright and full of energy, and as we started catching up, I felt a sense of nostalgia for the person I used to be.
"It's so good to see you, Jason," Linda said, her eyes reflecting genuine happiness. "I've heard bits and pieces about what's been going on, but I wanted to hear it from you."
"How are you really doing?"
I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I'm doing well, actually. It's been a journey, but I've learned a lot."
The time away, in the mountains, was exactly what I needed.
It gave me perspective, and I feel like I'm finally in a good place. Linda nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that."
It's not easy to make such a big change, but it sounds like you found something meaningful.
I have, I admitted.
It's been challenging, but also incredibly rewarding.
I've realized that I was missing something fundamental in my life, and I'm finally starting to address that.
We talked about the past year, about the difficulties, the lessons learned, and the new directions our lives had taken.
Linda shared her own updates, and I was struck by how much we had both grown.
Despite the challenges we had faced, there was a sense of resilience and hope in both our stories.
As our conversation shifted to more personal matters, Linda asked about Grace.
I spoke about her with genuine affection, describing how our time together had changed me and how we were building a life that was both fulfilling and balanced.
"She sounds wonderful," Linda said, her smile warm. "I'm glad you found someone who supports you and helps you see things differently." "She really does," I agreed. "I never imagined I'd find this kind of connection, especially after everything that happened. But it feels right, and that's something I haven't felt in a long time." Linda reached across the table and gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. "It sounds like you found a good place."
Sometimes, it takes a lot of courage to make such changes, but you've done it.
"And you should be proud of that."
The conversation ended on a positive note, with promises to stay in touch and catch up more regularly. As I left the cafe, I felt a renewed sense of clarity.
Meeting with Linda had been a reminder of the person I used to be and the journey I had taken since then. It was a chance to see how much I had evolved and to appreciate the progress I had made.
Back at the apartment, Grace and I talked about the meeting, sharing our thoughts and reflections. We both agreed that reconnecting with the past was important, not to dwell on it but to acknowledge how it had shaped us. It was a way to understand our growth and reaffirm our commitment to the new life we were building together. As we settled into the evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey we had undertaken, from the shock of discovering Lily's betrayal to the healing we had found in the mountains.
And now, to the renewed life we were creating in Los Angeles. It had been a tumultuous path, but each step had brought us closer to understanding what truly mattered.
With Grace by my side, I felt ready to face the future with optimism. We had learned to embrace change, to seek balance, and to appreciate the moments of clarity and peace. The challenges we had faced had made us stronger, and our relationship had become a testament to resilience and growth.
As I looked forward to what lay ahead, I knew that the journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more changes, and more opportunities to grow.
But with the lessons of the past guiding us, and with Grace's unwavering support, I felt confident that we could handle whatever came our way.
In the end, it wasn't just about overcoming the past or finding a new path. It was about embracing the present and being open to the possibilities of the future. And with that mindset, I was ready to move forward, to live fully and authentically, and to continue building a life that was truly my own. The arrival of spring in Los Angeles brought with it a renewed sense of energy and possibility.
The city, vibrant and ever-changing, seemed to reflect the shifts that had taken place in my own life. As I walked through the streets, I felt a deep sense of renewal, a readiness to embrace the future with an open heart.
Grace and I had spent the past few months settling back into our routines while incorporating the lessons we had learned during our time away. Our relationship was stronger than ever, built on a foundation of understanding and shared experiences. We had made a conscious effort to maintain the balance we had discovered, finding ways to integrate tranquility and purpose into our busy lives. One sunny afternoon, as we strolled through a local park, Grace turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Jason, I've been thinking a lot about what we want for the future. We've made so many changes already, but what about our long-term goals?" I considered her question, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension.
The changes we had made were significant, but the idea of looking ahead to the long term was both daunting and exhilarating.
"I've been thinking about that too," I admitted.
"We found a good rhythm, but what comes next? How do we build on this?" Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting a sense of determination. "I think it's about continuing to evolve, to grow together.
We've made a lot of progress, but there's always room for more.
What if we set some new goals for ourselves, things that push us out of our comfort zones but still align with what we've learned?"
Her words resonated with me.
The idea of setting new goals, of continuing to challenge ourselves, felt right. It was a way to ensure that we didn't fall back into old habits, that we remained focused on the values that had become so important to us. "What do you have in mind?"
I asked, curious about her vision. Grace took a deep breath, her enthusiasm evident. "Well, for starters, I'd love to explore more creative projects. I've always wanted to write a book, something that reflects the journey we've been on. And maybe we could look into ways to give back, to use what we've learned to help others who might be going through similar challenges." I nodded, impressed by her ideas. "I think those are great goals.
And for me, I want to continue to find ways to balance my career with my personal life.
Maybe it's time to take on new projects that align more closely with my values. Or to find ways to mentor others in the field."
As we talked, we began to outline our goals more concretely.
We set specific milestones for Grace's writing project and discussed potential avenues for community involvement.
For my career, we brainstormed ways to incorporate the balance and fulfillment we had found into my work, exploring new opportunities that felt both exciting and meaningful.
With our goals in place, we began to take steps toward achieving them. Grace started working on her book.
dedicating time each week to write and develop her ideas. She also reached out to local organizations to explore volunteer opportunities, looking for ways to contribute to causes she cared about. Her passion and commitment were inspiring, and I was eager to support her in any way I could.
For my part, I began to reassess my professional projects, seeking out those that aligned with my newfound perspective. I reached out to colleagues and clients to discuss new possibilities, focusing on projects that had a positive impact and allowed me to incorporate the balance and mindfulness I had discovered.
As the months went by, we continued to make progress toward our goals. The challenges we faced were met with a sense of purpose and optimism, and we found joy in the journey of pursuing our dreams. Our relationship flourished as we supported each other's endeavors, celebrating each achievement and learning from each setback. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of our apartment, overlooking the city lights, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. The past year had been a roller coaster of emotions and experiences, but it had led us to a place of clarity and fulfillment. We had embraced change, faced our fears, and found a new direction. Grace looked at me with a smile, her hand resting in mine. "We've come a long way, haven't we?"
"We have," I agreed, feeling a profound sense of contentment.
"And I'm excited about what's to come."
"We've built something really special, and I'm looking forward to continuing this journey with you." As the city buzzed below us, I realized that our story was far from over.
It was a new beginning, filled with possibilities and the promise of a future we were ready to embrace. We had learned that the key to a fulfilling life was not in escaping the challenges but in facing them with courage and grace. With our goals set and our hearts full, we stepped into the future together, ready to take on whatever came our way.
Our journey had taught us that the most meaningful path was one we walked together, with hope, determination, and a deep appreciation for the journey itself.